First up, let's really unpack this bare promise problem. Why does the law demand something more? Why isn't your word just enough?
Well, a lot of promises are what the law calls gratuitous, which is just a fancy way of saying they're free gifts. The legal system needs a clear filter to separate casual, everyday promises from serious deals. It stops the courts from getting clogged up with lawsuits every time someone flakes on a social plan.
And that filter, that magic ingredient that turns a bare promise into a real, enforceable contract, is consideration. It is the something in return.
The whole thing boils down to a simple, powerful idea. Quid pro quo. Something for something. If I make a promise to you, you have to give or promise something back to me for my promise to count. It has to be a two-way street.
So what is this price exactly? Well, it doesn't have to be money. It could be an action you perform. It could even be something you agree not to do, that's called forbearance, or it could just be a promise to do or not do something in the future. And this isn't just some abstract concept. It's spelled out right here in the law, specifically in Section 2D of the Indian Contract Act. Now, I know what you're thinking. That looks like a wall of legal text. Don't worry, we're not going to get bogged down in the jargon. Let's just pull out the important bits.
Have you ever wondered what actually turns a casual, everyday promise into a deal that a court would actually enforce? Well, there's a secret ingredient, a legal concept called consideration. And today, we're going to break down exactly what it is and how it works. So what is that big difference? Is it a fancy handshake, a super formal document? I mean, yeah, those things can be part of it, but the real heart of the matter is something way more fundamental. It's one single, powerful legal idea. The easiest way to think about it is like this. For any promise to be taken seriously in the eyes of the law, it's got to have a price tag on it. Something of value has to be exchanged. And that price? Well, that's exactly what we call consideration. This whole idea is built on a very old principle. You've probably heard it, quid pro quo. It's Latin for something for something. It's all about mutual exchange. This makes sure that a contract isn't just a one-sided deal, but a real agreement where both sides have a little skin in the game.
And listen, this isn't just some vague concept. It's spelled out right here in Section 2D of the Indian Contract Act. Now, I know legal text can look a little intimidating, but the most important phrase to catch is at the desire of the promiser. All that really means is that the person making the promise has to be the one who actually asks for that price in return.
So, for consideration to be legit, it has to follow 6 essential rules. Think of it like a checklist. If you can tick all 6 boxes, then you've got the solid foundation for a contract that will actually hold up. So let's dive into them.
All right, rule number 1, and this one is crucial. The price has to be requested by the person making the promise. If you just do something nice for someone out of the blue, no matter how helpful it is, it doesn't count as legal consideration because they never asked you to do it.
A classic case, Durga Prasad v. Baldio, explains this perfectly. So picture this. A market gets built, but it was requested by a government official, not the actual shopkeepers who would use it. Now, the shopkeepers were thrilled, of course, and they later promised to pay the builder a commission. But when they didn't pay up, the court sided with them. Why? Because the market wasn't built at their desire. The act was voluntary from their perspective.
Okay, on to our second rule. And this is where things start to get pretty interesting, especially when you compare different legal systems. The big question here is, who can actually provide that price tag, that consideration?
Under English law, it's really strict. Only the person who is receiving the promise can provide the consideration. But Indian law, it's much more flexible. The Act specifically says the promisee or any other person. This is huge. It means a third party, someone who's technically a stranger to the contract, can step in and provide the consideration on behalf of the promisee.
So we've talked about who can provide consideration, but what about when? Does it have to be an immediate exchange? Well, the answer might actually surprise you.
Indian law is pretty cool here because it recognizes 3 different timelines. It can be past consideration, that's an act you already did before the promise was even made. It can be present, which is also called executed consideration. Think of a simple cash sale. Everything happens right there and then. And it can also be future or executory, which is basically just an exchange of promises to do things down the line.
Next up, let's get into the value of the consideration itself. This brings us to 2 rules that really go hand in hand. The price has to be real, but, and this is a big but, it doesn't have to be fair or equal.
So, rule number 4, consideration has to be real. It needs to have some kind of actual value in the eyes of the law.
You can't promise to, bring the stars down from the sky. That's illusory. A promise to do something physically impossible is, legally speaking, worthless. The law needs something tangible.
But what does value even mean? This is where it gets fascinating. In the famous case of Chappell v. Nestle, the company offered records if you sent in a bit of money plus 3 of their chocolate bar wrappers. And the court said that even the wrappers, which you'd probably just throw away, were part of the consideration. Why? Because for Nestle, getting those wrappers back promoted their chocolate sales, and that had real value to them.
And that just flows perfectly into rule number 5. Consideration does not need to be adequate. The law doesn't really care if you got a good deal or a bad deal. As long as there is some real consideration, courts are not going to step in and act like price police.
I mean, just look at this. In the case of Thomas v. Thomas, a woman was allowed to live in a house for the rest of her life. And in exchange for that incredible promise, all she had to do was pay a yearly rent of just £1.
So what do you think? £1 a year, is that really enough to make a deal like that legally binding?
And the answer is a huge, resounding yes. It's not the court's job to decide if that's a fair price. Their job is just to confirm that some consideration exists. As long as the two parties agreed to it freely, the law protects their freedom to make their own bargain, whether it's good, bad, or otherwise.
And that brings us to our 6th and final rule. And honestly, this one is just pure common sense. The consideration has to be lawful. Section 23 of the Act makes this crystal clear. Any agreement where the consideration is illegal or fraudulent or hurts someone or is just plain against public policy, well, that agreement is void right from the start. You can't have an enforceable contract to do something illegal. It's just not going to happen.
So, there you have it, the 6 rules. But what's the big takeaway here? Why does this legal idea from way back in 1872 still matter so much to us today? Let's do a quick-fire recap. Here's your checklist. Number 1, it's got to be at the promisor's desire. 2, it can come from the promisee or anyone else. 3, the timing can be past, present, or future. 4, it has to be real. 5, it doesn't need to be adequate. And finally, number 6, it absolutely must be lawful. Get those right, and you've got yourself a contract.
At the end of the day, consideration really is the lifeblood of a contract. It's the law's way of making sure there's real intent and some level of fairness. It's what takes a simple, empty promise and turns it into a serious, binding commitment, all because both parties now have something at stake.
So the rule of thumb is pretty clear. No consideration, no contract. An agreement without that something for something is void. But is that always true? What about a promise that's made out of pure love and affection? Well, the law actually carves out a few really surprising exceptions in Section 25. But that is a story for another time. Thanks for joining me.